Hey Ashby, how you doing?
How you doing, Dr. Phillips?
Pretty good. Am I okay? Coming through okay? My wireless is a little dicey right now, looks like.
No, this is perfect.
Oh, good, good, good. Okay.
So
I,
you
I have
know,
an alternative setup, but nothing seems to work quite right. So that's.
no, you're fine. Um, so you're pretty famous in Clarion.
Am I, I've been here a long time. I've been here for 22 years. So
I see that
22 years is a good time to do it. Yeah.
I notice that people love you more on social media than they do a lot of other professors.
Well, I'm not sure. So I mean, I'm definitely post a lot more than other people do, which is probably part of the problem. So kind of inundate people with posts, and I do a lot of joke posts. So I'm sure that's nice. People appreciate getting to laugh every once in a while. Every life is so serious. Everybody, everything's always dark. It's always gloomy, seeming like, the world always seems like there's terrible things going on. So it's nice just sometimes to not be that way, just laugh, have a nice joke. So that's probably most of it, to be perfectly honest.
Why did you say that that might be a bad thing that you post more?
What's up?
Why'd you say it might be a bad thing that you post more?
Oh, you can inundate somebody's box. So like I've got like close to 3,500 followers or friends, I should say. They're not followers, but and so when you post to 3,500 people, I'm only getting some of their stuff every once in a while. But if somebody's only got like 100 friends, then all of a sudden now everything they're seeing on their feed is Dr. Phillips posting one more thing. so I'm afraid I constitute too large of a percentage of the information they're getting on social media. So that cannot possibly be good.
I think it's important for people to joke more.
Oh,
People,
yeah, that's true. Well, it's like when you got a dark year like this, particularly this last year, and people they're on their phones a lot more probably than they would be. I mean, come summer, if everything kind of loosens up a little bit, people won't be on social media. But this last year has been really social media all the time because sometimes you're stuck in your house. Like this time last year, we were all stuck inside. This is like the middle of quarantine. This notion that maybe in May it was going to lift, and then it never really happened. We never really got a lifting of quarantine, and then people were just kind of stuck, and it was like a crazy year. So all these things that were happening, they get sort of amplified because you got nothing else to think about. So if there's something causing you grief on social media, well, it's going to cause you grief again and again and again because that's all you're going to see. So hopefully we can all get off social media a little bit more in the summer and get back to some type of a normal life. I do think that because the nature of social media is a little bit false and fake and dramatic for obvious purpose. When you post something, often it's going to be um, something that's important to you, so you're passionate about it, whatever it might be. When that happens, you get really invested in it, maybe overly invested. And then the truth is someplace out there, and then we're getting all the truth filtered into social media. So we end up getting all kinds of fake news and false statements and bad sources, and then people lump up because it's our human nature to kind of bifurcate our relationship. So we're going to be on this side of an issue, we're going to be on this side of an issue, and we end up having all kinds of debates, and all of a sudden they get ugly fast because people get too emotional. And you can take any issue that could be the most innocuous, harmless issue, but because people have nothing else to talk about, then suddenly it explodes, and there's always the left side and the right side, and then you end up getting a battle about nothing, which obscures some of the other battles maybe we should be more concerned about. And then when you get actual real issues, now where we should come up with some common understanding, like like with George Floyd, it's like smack you in the face, guy gets murdered. It's like there's no way around it. But because you got that, everybody gets in that process of being on one side or the other, then people just naturally go to the side, and then all evidence goes out, and then as soon as you pick a side, it's like picking a team in a football game. It's like that way you don't have a stake. You just pick one side, and then whatever the ref calls, if it's not on your team, that's okay, and if it's against your team, then it's not. And that's kind of how people start adjudicating issues, and it ends up being not only deeply irrational but socially destructive. And that's kind of a problem with social media right now. And it got, like I said, it got amplified and exacerbated last year because everybody was on social media. People who'd never even been on social media were on social media. All the more reason to post jokes, I guess. Right?
Yeah, social media, people tend to gravitate towards the hate and the negativity.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, people kind of do that anyway. I think there's nothing about social media that causes us to be different than what we already are. It just makes it a little bit easier, So if you're in a social situation and somebody brings up some uncomfortable topic, then all these nonverbal and cues that people recognize, they kind of kick in, and suddenly we socially norm to one another, and maybe we're a little more polite because we recognize that that's appropriate. All these behaviors that we've learned to operate in a social group, they go out the window, and then this person, typing some madness on your phone, and then somebody else is just going to go, I agree entirely with what they say. And somebody's, I can't believe you said that, and you get no ability to like find some emotional middle ground that you can all stand on. And then it just goes out of hand pretty quickly. So there are aspects of social media that are great in terms of making communication happen so I can stay in contact with people I couldn't stay in contact with. I can know what's happening in the lives of other people that would forever be obscure for me. I can increase my understanding of the world around because I have access to all this information. But all these old problems we have about what happens when you're isolated from facts and you're isolated from differing opinions, and then how that isolation leads to people having disagreements that get out of hand pretty fast. That's one of the problems with social media, yeah, for sure. So
yeah, no one wants to listen to anyone. They just want
to be right. Yeah. And they want to win. I do think the analogy of a football game is pretty telling. If you ever watch a Super Bowl with people who don't have a stake, because typically when you watch the Super Bowl, you don't got a team, right? Your team didn't make it to the Super Bowl. It's not the Steelers. For me, it would be the Chiefs. Finally, the Chiefs make the Super Bowl. But for years, it would never be a team that I had a stake in. But what happens when people watch the Super Bowl, they have a Super Bowl party, and then they pick a side. And then that's their team. And then suddenly I've seen it happen. Like people get angry at other people about a team that they don't really care about. They're in the middle of a game. And then once you're doing that, then you can kind of like, the game's over, you can stop, maybe you'll set it all aside. But if you can do that for a stupid football game, you can do that about pretty much anything, especially if there's some connection that you've got to the issue yourself personally. So it's a fact of human beings that we like to pick sides. And we use that first. We identify a side first, and then we figure out what we believe after that. And that's just not a good way to be if you want to be rational and if you want to have a society that works well together.
Yeah, I think the main problem is that we just don't listen to each other, and social media makes it way too easy to not listen to people.
That's right, because you're not listening.
Yeah.
When somebody's talking, you're processing that information. But when you got to post, what do people do when they read anything? They scan it,
Yeah.
for things that are interesting. So if somebody had a really long post, like, oh my, I'm not gonna read all that, then you just pick up kind of one you want to, So not only do you have confirmation bias, generally speaking, you can have it about just a single individual post where you're deciding what that post means, what they said, and adding anything that you want to it. And because the conversation is asynchronous sometimes, typically is, then it could be an hour before somebody responds. And then you're going back and forth and literally resolving nothing. I was talking to one of my boys the other day about, I encountered this sort of thing a long time ago. So back in the late 90s, I was on AOL. You can believe that. So just had university internet, the University of Missouri, probably would have been something like 97, 98. So way before most of anything. And but you had some chat rooms on AOL. So there was a chat room that was like for philosophy. So I thought, I'm a grad student of philosophy. I'll go in the chat room. So, we let people post, and then somebody else left to post. And there's one guy, he said something that's just so dickish about it. I'm like, he clearly he'd never had a philosophy class in life because it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And I was like typing back, and I thought I was a smart one because I'm sure I'm the grad student of philosophy, must be super smart about it. So I typed something back, and of course you get like a little edge. Right?
Yeah.
Don't have any emojis in those days, so it's pure text, and he comes back snarky and snarky, and we just kind of go at it back and forth, and suddenly I'm in this fight with this complete stranger about something I couldn't even begin to tell you what it was. I have no idea what it was you're arguing about. And I remember looking at this guy, I said, what the this guy's problem? And I look him up and I find out this information about him because for some reason that was available from the AOL site. And I said, well, I guess in my last line, I said, I guess this is why your wife divorced you, because this is how you are. And, you know, I was like, because I was infuriated because the way he was talking to me like I was a child.
Right.
And it's like, and then that was when I realized, because I like, if you try to be a wise person, try to learn quick. I'm like, this is toxic. Okay. This whole process is a toxic process. I tried it one more time for a class where we had this thing called Democracy Lab in a critical thinking class. And it's a great idea. So there's a guy who was out at maybe Bloomsburg or Millersville, and he was a political scientist, and he created this program. I'm sure he's making money off of it. And for like $10, the students would get on the site and we would work our way through this broad scale issue. It's like whether or not Social Security should be slightly modified in some way. Very reasonable stuff. And they had a booklet, so you learn about Social Security and all the different policies. So you're like trying to inform this discussion. And all these critical thinking students in my class are hooked up with students in lots of other classes across the entire country. And they're hooked up through these chat rooms, right? Through these discussion boards. And they're all reading the same material. So they're all supposed to be thinking about this. So we got the whole notion of liberal democracy you get from people like John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant is that you give people a certain amount of information, teach them all the facts that you can, all the scientifically relevant stuff. And because they're all reasonably rational, they'll end up kind of coming up to consensus. And even when there's mild disagreements, we can resolve our way through this disagreement. So that's how liberal democracy is supposed to work. But on that democracy lab, it didn't work. All the kids did was they'd post something snotty in the discussion board, then somebody else would post something snotty back, and then somebody would either decide one side of the issue or the other and say, I'm going with Bob on this one, and I'm going with Mary on this. They did not resolve any issues. And so in some sense, it was a fascinating lab experiment because that's kind of what a democracy is like, right? Yeah. And when you look at ancient democracies like Athens, that's kind of what happened. You'd have all these debates and they would end up being incredibly irrational. And that because of those irrational debates and the policy decisions made on the basis of those irrational debates, they ended up losing the Peloponnesian War because of an issue involving a particular general that got called back to attend trial because he's put on trial in the middle of a war over some vandalism that happened to some statues. And it was this, and the only reason it happened is because they were so litigious with one another, and they were so combative with one another. They split into these little 1 and 2. Right? There's always it's like Sith Lords. There's always 2. There's always the left side and there's always the right side. And they ended up destroying their entire democracy. And they did. They lost the war. Eventually, they get taken over by Alexander the Great, and that was the end of Athenian democracy. Boom, just like that. And what you see in our society is something very similar. We dichotomize ourselves to the point where we simply cannot think of ourselves outside of a ideology. We use terms left and right, even though they don't mean anything.
Nothing.
What it means to be on the left, what it means, it doesn't mean anything. It's like left of what, right? Left of center, Then we act like, well, you got a choice. You can be a donkey, right? Or you can be an elephant, or you can be a donkey elephant. and then there's nothing else. And it's like, no. And it's absurd because you can have a whole host of different beliefs about all kinds of things. You don't have to try to believe things on any sort of ideology, but it's even worse than that. It's like there's no real ideology there. They just got a clump of beliefs that they kind of hold together, and they call yourself conservative, and a clump of beliefs you hold together, you call yourself liberal, and then you fight. And it's mostly about deciding which side you're going to be. Are you conservative or are you liberal? Then this tells you what you're supposed to believe about certain things that have nothing to do with one another. So if you're conservative, maybe you're in favor of guns but against marijuana, or they have nothing to do with one another.
Yeah,
if you're
all the hate comes from politics, and I don't like politics. I think all if you tell me you're a politician, I think you're a liar. I think all politicians are liars. It's just because all the hate comes from politicians.
Well, but part of the problem is that's true. Yeah, there's a lot of bad politicians, but of course we elect those people. Yeah. What happens is we elect people that we want to be bad people. So we elect people. It's like we want a lawyer. So we want lawyers to be just, and we want them to be something like To Kill a Mockingbird. Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird, this lawyer with deep integrity, but not really. Right? When you go to trial, what you want is this hard-nosed, F. Lee Bailey kind of lying kind of person who's just going to say whatever to get you off. Right? So we act like we want the one thing, but then we want the other. So we want politicians to make changes that are good for the country. No, that's not who you elect. Who you elect is somebody who's a mouthpiece for some ideology that you think is true in some fashion. And you want them to do exactly what you want them to do, which is you want them to fight and you want them to get that guy and you want them to have these wins, just like they're playing a football game, right? So you want, just like when somebody's watching a football game, they want the teams to play fair and just, to be a clean game, but know what they really want. They want to see their teammate smash the other guy down. That's what they want to see. Look at that tackle. Yeah, it was a little unclean, but that's okay. That's my boy, right? That's my boy up there. And that's what we want of our politicians. So we get what we want. If we wanted moderate politicians, if we really valued that, we would end up getting moderate politicians through the electoral process. But we don't, right? We want radicals. And we want people that are, that I say are mouthpieces for an ideology, even if they don't really believe it. So you end up with people that have, and this is a generalization, and this is crass generalization. I apologize to all the decent and hardworking politicians out there because I know some of them and they're good people. But there's too many of the other side that are going and to make anything happen where they are simply there to serve their own powered interests, to achieve, to make money, to get out and make more money. And they will do and say whatever they want to. And for the most part, it doesn't matter. There are people in politics nowadays, they're basically Machiavellian. They're just like, I don't care if you're, if I'm in a red district, then I'm going to say whatever I think those people want to hear, then I'll get elected. If I'm in a liberal leaning district, I'm going to say whatever I think they want to hear.
Yep. Then
you end up getting people that do pretty much what the people want. They get elected because of it. And then the people complain, all these damn politicians, right? Like, well, we create that, and it's because sometimes that's what we want. We want too much. We want a democracy that functions, but we also want to say whatever the hell we want to say, do whatever the hell we want to do, and push through whatever legislation that we want to push through. We're not well trained to moderate. And social media, of course, is the worst place to achieve moderation. You can't have a consensus, and the whole point is to disparage and deride the person that you're talking to. All you end up doing is exacerbating emotional states that lead to a lack of rationality, and you get back and forth swings of power. So then somebody's going to swing into power, and they're going to be super conservative. Things are terrible, and they swing back, right, a different direction, and people hate that, right? And even if nothing really bad is happening, they'll pretend that they hate that because they know that they're supposed to, right? Because that's not my guy. So whatever they're doing, no matter what, Donald Trump could have done something where he saved the country from China single-handedly with a Bowie knife, and people still hated his guts, right? Joe Biden's in the same situation. Joe Biden could create a healthcare system that's going to give everybody exactly what they need in terms of the healthcare at a reasonable price. It's going to save the country from indebtedness, and people would say, no, he's a socialist fool. So by people, I mean us, Americans, we're the problem, at least in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think if like me and you hated each other, Trump or Biden is going to fix that. It's between me and you. And people like to think that whoever is in office is going to fix our problems, and that's never going to be the case. Because I personally don't give a shit who's in office. Because at the end of the day, my problems can only be fixed by me.
That's another problem with the notion of politics is that it is a little bit, it's lazy, right? And so and it's foolish because if you know how the presidency works, you know that the president doesn't have that much power. Now, there are certain things that every person who becomes president, it's one of the worst realizations of their life, right? I'm the most powerful person in the world, they think. No, you're not really that powerful at all. You have an entire bureaucracy that does things. You have other people that you're competing with. You have laws that you're beholden to. You don't have a lot of power. That's why people write these executive orders. They're pretty weak-minded stuff because that's their limited power. So the president of the United States doesn't have a lot of power. They can only have power that they can exercise well. A president that exercised power well, not a good guy, but he exercised power was Lyndon B. Johnson, and Lyndon B. Johnson got the Civil Rights Act passed. He got Medicaid and Medicare passed. He made changes in the United States that we still are benefiting from long term, but he had to do so by working it, and he was not afraid to work it, so he would go around and he would twist arms and he would make people do what he wanted to do with threats and cajolings. And he used the death of JFK. He did everything he can do to get things done, but he did so with an actual goal of actually trying to benefit the country. So he's an interesting figure because of that when you evaluate him as a president. But he got things done, not because he had the power. He did not. What he had was the willingness to use what power he had to achieve the goals that he thought was necessary. Whereas we often think, since we get this guy elected, then the world's going to be better. It's like I go back to the football analogy. How many times does it happen when somebody's got a football team? If we just had this one quarterback, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We get that one quarterback and everything's going to happen. Then you get that one quarterback. You go, no. It turns out that the quarterback can only do so much. Mm-hmm. And the quarterback, to be perfectly honest, has more power and ability to achieve the goals of the team than a president does to achieve the goals of the country. It's a lot simpler for Patrick Mahomes to win a football game than it is for Joe Biden to get something passed to Congress, no question about it. And so I think we put too much hope in these individuals. And like I say, it is a little lazy because maybe that's what you should be doing. You want the world to be a better place. What are you doing, right? Are you actually doing something about it? You believe that Black Lives Matter? What the hell are you doing about it?
People just want to tell you what to do. They want to point fingers, but then at the end of the day, all they're doing is making a post. They're not actually going and doing something about it.
Yeah, and
that's okay. If you, right, I don't judge you for not post. If you don't post about something, I don't judge you, right? So that's it. But the moment you start judging people and telling them they're not doing anything, you better be doing something yourself.
I agree. I mean, that there's a sense of deep hypocrisy about that because we do expect other people to do things, but we should step up. And there are things that need to be done. This world is not perfect by any stretch. Black lives do matter. Things need to be done, right?
Right.
What are you doing? What do we? I can't say that I've done anything that's been effective in achieving the goals. Of course, there's obvious reasons. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I could accomplish. And I'm sure most people feel that way too. They feel like they don't know what they could accomplish. And that's why you do need good leaders, because what a good leader can do, even though they can't do things themselves, they can provide a vision, they can provide a sense of unity, and that sense of unity can lead to group accomplishments where group accomplishments are necessary. So that is the downfall of having this constant battle back and forth, is that we deride our leaders and make it impossible for them to achieve the goals that we ourselves want to achieve and can't do by ourselves because we don't have the ability.
Yeah, so me, like I don't protest, I don't kneel, right? But but I'm a minority. I believe in the Black Lives Matter movement, but I'm not going out and judging people who refuse to kneel or who refuse to protest.
Exactly. Well, first off, that I consider that not particularly patriotic. So if somebody wants to kneel, that's great because they're just being a good American. There's nothing more American than a protest. So
right.
That's America 101. So that's how we started. This whole country was started on protests. So how anybody could diss somebody trying to do a protest, I don't understand, because they're just, when somebody does that, they complain about somebody protesting or trying to make changes. I just wash my hands of them because they're not a good American, because good Americans, part of what that means is that you're trying to make positive changes towards the goals of a democracy where we also believe in human rights and egalitarianism. And if you're not going to do the job, step out of the way of someone else is willing to do the job. But that's just a sense of entitlement where somebody feels like not only do they not have to try to achieve some goal, they can pretend that there's nothing to achieve, and then they can deride other people for what they do try to do. That I find a bit disgusting. Right?
I believe
help with the process. That's fine, but don't pretend that somehow other people trying to do it is a problem for you. How does kneeling in a football stadium in any way impact you?
Right.
It does not. Right. You get these specious arguments about somehow you're deriding the military. You're not deriding the military. I was in the military. I know what derides the military. You're there to stand up as a patriotic system to represent the country, and the country is a complicated place filled with lots of people with lots of needs and lots of same values. And one of the values is that we want people to be treated fairly. We don't want people to be treated unjustly in terms of our policing or in terms of anything else. So who could be against that? And for somebody to think that somehow the world is just magical and fair because they happen to live in a world that's magical and fair is foolishness, right? And that's my problem with that, is that I can't say that I'm a grand solution to a lot of problems. I've been at lots of protests, but typically they're self-interested protests involving education, something, or their professional goals in terms of protests, or they're going to be something that involves my union because I'm a member of the union. So those protests they'd be self-interested. I can't claim that those are grand enterprises. But if somebody else wants to do something that's grand, more power to them. That's a good thing, right?
I'm Hispanic, right? But if a bunch of Hispanics were to protest for Hispanics' rights, I would not do it because they're just not my thing. But
Gotcha.
I would applaud them for doing it. The way I see it, right? And I would never kneel for the national anthem, but I don't judge someone who does kneel. I think
That's it. Right.
where people are making the problem is that they're not flying this. They're flying every other flag but this guy.
Right, exactly. Trust me, I know. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I am psychologically unable to not stand for the national anthem. So that's just the way I'm wired. Yeah. So
me too.
And it's just part of how I grew up, but it's also the fact that I was in the service, you're standing up for the national anthem all the time. I can't, that's just part of my persona. I'd have to change who I was as a person. But I don't expect other people to do that. If nobody stood for the national anthem and I did stand, I'm not going to go, oh, what the hell's marathon? Don't care. I'm standing because that's part of my value set. No question about it. And, but part of being an American is also allowing other people to have different value sets and different beliefs and different actions. And so I really don't understand that. It ends up being, to my mind, deflection. People don't want to, they want to make it easy and pretend that there's not problems in the world simply because they're not subject to them. They don't want to feel guilty. They don't want to feel like they have to do something. People are so worried that their life might change even slightly to allow somebody else to have a better life. And sometimes that selfishness comes through in their disparagement of people's actions.
Yeah. So when 9/11 happened, right? They say that 9/12 was the most joined this country has ever been. And what flag was everyone flying on 9/12?
The American flag, exactly. They weren't flying the Confederate flag, and they weren't flying this military, this sort of weird. I know that it's a flag that they have for cops, So, they got a special flag for cops. It's like an American flag, but those things look to me, and I get disgusted because they look like the basements of the American flag, and they look like corruptions of something that is I consider to be a noble thing. The American flag, for me, represents the basic values of the Constitution, and they represent the values of a people that are trying to demonstrate that a democracy can work where rights can be protected at the same time. Yeah. I don't know that we're very good at it, but we've been trying for a long time, and we've set a standard that other people have followed because of it. And so that's a value, and we sometimes fall short of that value. We've fallen short of that value on multiple occasions. So the flag has got a tattered history, but when you fly the Confederate flag, that's not American. No. When you fly these flags that have these special stripes, that's not an American flag. You're deciding then that America is just only what you think that it is. And that's just a lie. You don't get to decide. America is based on a formulation of values that were set in our Constitution and set by the founding fathers. And you don't have to accept that, but then you're not being an American. To some degree, then you're not really an American, in my humble opinion, too.
I believe you should fly the American flag. And if you're like, I understand the belief behind Blue Lives Matter, Orange Lives Matter.
Absolutely. Right? And I'll be clear, Blue Lives do matter. People mock that too, but that's not true. Cops' lives matter. And they have a difficult job. That's why you get sick of these crass generalizations. Cops matter. They're people. They got families. They do a very difficult job. Whether they're a police officer on the beat, whether they're a detective, whether or not there's somebody who's working in the criminal justice system in a different place, like in corrections or probation, they have difficult jobs. There's some bad people out there, and they have to deal with them on a regular basis. So they have a difficult life, and their lives matter, So there's nothing wrong with saying Blue Lives Matter. It's just the reason people say it. They don't say it because they're really concerned about people who are in policing. They simply want to knock down somebody else, worrying about Black Americans being killed at higher rates than whites, Black Americans being detained and arrested at higher rates than whites, going to jail for longer terms, being more likely to be executed, those things, right? And so that it becomes a rhetorical thing as opposed to something deep. If somebody had just come up with the notion Blue Lives Matter out of nothing, 50 years ago, then it'd be like, of course, that could be something we celebrate because we should celebrate our police forces more often than we probably do. But to bring it up as a rhetorical smack to try to tell other people that somehow their lives don't matter, which is the only reason people brought it up in the first place. It's just a rhetorical rebuttal, just like all lives matter is to the notion of Black Lives Matter. Then you're not doing it because you care about cops. You're doing it because you want to win a fight. You're doing it because you don't want to care about somebody else. You're now pretending that somehow these lives matter more. right? When they don't.
Yeah, it's just I think it was just a defense mechanism, and like I
That's
said,
exactly right,
I
Ashby.
believe in flying the American flag. If someone came out with a Hispanic Lives Matter flag, I would not fly it. If they gave it to me, I'd throw it away. I believe in this flag and just that flag. If you're American, you fly this flag, and if you're flying any other flag over this, technically that's illegal in this country. You're not being American.
I agree. That's exactly right.
Technically, right? There is a law. You're not allowed to fly any flag on
That's
top of
right.
the flag.
And that's why I get when you get people that modify the flag in these weird ways, you get these hybrid flags, half American, half Confederate. I gotta bite my tongue because I despise that. Absolutely.
Right. And like I said, I understand. So I come from Baltimore, right? So I went from my whole life.
Yeah.
If you're from Baltimore City, you disrespect cops. That's how it is, right? I moved here and I've grown this respect for the police. So I know both sides, right? I've seen both sides.
Sure.
The problem is that no one's seen both sides, but I've seen both sides. And I understand why someone will say, I don't trust police officers. And I understand why other people only trust police officers.
And that's exactly that, because you break free of those generalizations, because if you grow up in a certain area and in your particular area where you live, the police are violent, they're dicks, they're abusive. And if somebody doesn't think that those areas exist, they don't know what the world is like, because they do exist. And there are going to be districts where the police are going to be complete assholes all the time, because that's what that culture is in that particular police department. That's that particular culture, and their justifications for it, the reasons why they are, don't care. That'll be a fact. Right? But there are going to be other police agencies and districts where that culture is not there, where it's going to be a better place, where it's more professionalized, where the individuals have concern for rights, where that's part of the process. That's true everywhere you go. It's like every school district will be different depending on the culture of that school district. How much do they value education? How much do they value sports? How much do they value the music program? And when we start making these generalizations across the board, all we end up doing is creating fights, because the second you say cops don't matter and you're talking to somebody from this area, they're going to look, what the hell is your problem?
Right.
Yeah. All the cops I know, maybe it's my dad, maybe it's my uncle, they're good people.
Right.
And now you're saying that they're not a good person. Then now you can't talk to that person. Now you can't get them on your side. Now you can't get them to believe what is true that might help you with your own cause, because you just decided to make a crass generalization across the board. So you have to be careful with your discourse, but people are not. They just say what they want to because we're trying to be dramatic. We're trying to get retweeted, and we're trying to get more hits and more likes and all the rest, And instead of focus on the issue, what is the issue? We have systemic racism in this country that has to be addressed. That's a fact. You can't fix that problem by disparaging the very groups that you're trying to fix. What you have to do is you have to do something hard. That is, you actually have to figure out what the problem is, find ways to resolve it, and get people on your side, because you're going to need them.
I think the problem is that we put too much blame on people, right? So if someone from Clarion, right, so if I'm talking to someone from Clarion, I know that they don't understand where I come from. So if they're waving around that Blue Lives Matter flag, I'm not going to automatically think they're a black person, right?
Right.
So I talk to them, and I mean, I used to be this way, right? If you like cops, I used to not like you either. But now I'm sort of in this in between where I feel like information is so important. Information is the most important thing in this world. People don't have that information. They don't know what it's like to be from Baltimore. Most white people don't know how it feels to be pulled over and maybe treated differently. I don't know how that feels. I've never had that feeling, right? And I'm Hispanic, but I also understand. But these people don't understand. So how can you blame them for not living the life you live? You can't blame them for that.
Right.
Blame someone for being from Clarion and you being from the city. You can't. That's not their fault. But the moment they stop listening, that's when it becomes a problem.
Exactly right. Because the second if somebody comes up to me, and I'll give you a slightly different example, when they say that I'm transgender, what could I say? I could do one or two things. I could say, no, you're not. There's no such thing. Okay. or I can say, that's what they believe.
Right.
And that's what their experience is. And how could I know what their experience is? Because I'm not them. Oh. So I may think that just because I'm a person and I happen to have a sexual orientation that's hetero or cis, that somehow that means that everybody must be that way. But then we find out, no, they're not. So what are you going to do? Well, then you could either say one of the things, they're completely wrong, because I have to be right. Or I could do something that's a little bit more modest and humble and say, the world's more complicated than I realize.
Right.
There are people that have a different gender than me. I had no idea. And then I can now expand my understanding of the world in a way that allows them to be treated as they deserve to be treated, like a human being and a person. And when somebody tells me that cops arrest me all the time, I'm constantly being stopped by cops, and it's abusive, I could say, no, I don't give, that doesn't happen to me. So of course it could happen to someone else. No, I'd say that's not the way it should be. That's the problem, because that's not acceptable. That's how the response should be. One is narrow and arrogant, and one is humble and open. And the world is a complex place. And so if you're not humble and open to that fact, you're a fool, an absolute fool.
Being open is so important. Even
nobody.
I'm still working on being open, right? I see if a cop were to walk in the room, I don't feel safe. If anything, I'm still defensive, right?
Yes,
I'm still defensive when the cop walks into the room, but I no longer.
And the reason that, exactly. So when people don't, that's what doesn't make any sense. It's like everybody, when a cop gets behind them, what do? Everybody freaks out.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody. I'll freak out. It's like when you're going through security at an airport. You don't got a gun, but you feel like you do, right? You're like, maybe I hope there's not a gun there. You're like, why would you think there's a gun? You didn't bring a gun. So you worry about these things because you're nervous. Why are you nervous? Because there's a person who's an authority who can do what they want to. If things can go south. So if everybody recognizes that even they who've never had a problem with a cop are afraid of cops, why would they be surprised that maybe some of the reason why people are afraid of cops is based on legitimate reasons? Right? That seems to make sense. And then fix the problem. You don't have to disparage individual cops and somehow generalize across the board. And to say what somebody might want to disparage people who are wealthy and say, oh, the wealthy are terrible. They exploit the poor. No, that's not true. Just as it's not true of the poor that they're all lazy and they're not willing to work. Individual people do individual things, and that's where responsibility lies. And when we treat people because of their group membership, all we end up doing is getting away from what's actually true. And all we end up doing is creating fights about individuals as opposed to trying to find out what the problem is and resolve the problem. Problems in policing could be fixed if people would just be willing to look at the truth about policing and do so in a honest fashion. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of honesty in this country.
Yeah, it's debatable how to fix the police problem. My opinion is we need to train them more. We need to train them in combat, because at the end of the day, the police officers who kill people, they're just bitches. They can't fight, right? At the end of the day, they're just soft. That's why they have to go to those extreme measures, right? Someone who knows how to fight, they're gonna take you to the ground, and the moment they know you're not a problem, they're gonna lock you up and keep you there. Some guy who might be not as tough might just kneel on you for 9 minutes.
And I think that a lot of the problems with policing in terms of like excessive force during extreme moments, right? There are other times where it's more deliberative, and then there's other types of processes that can come into play. But when you've got these sort of knee-jerk responses, when somebody's immediately pulling a gun out and shooting somebody, that's a problem of training. There's no question about it. Because all that has to happen is that person be trained to not do that. That when you're in a situation where lives are at stake, you have to learn to process information faster, identify threats more accurately, and you need to do that as part of your training, because otherwise you just go threat, boom, kill. And then somebody who's not really a threat, that was maybe mentally ill, you're exacerbating a problem. And part of it is this notion that I think that police forces across the country have been trained to overprotect themselves.
Right.
That is, they're trained, and I understand where that training would come from. You're like, you got to make sure you protect yourself. You're a person too, absolutely right. But you have to take reasonable risk. And part of the reasonable risk that a cop has to take is that they have to be willing to take a moment before they use excessive force, take a moment and risk their own life and maybe somebody else's life, because they are trying to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
This whole, the one thing I didn't agree with is the whole defund the police. I think we need to fund them more so they can have more training, right?
You need to
training.
Yeah, defund the police was a very dumb slogan. Of course, sometimes it got misinterpreted, but at the same time, the slogan is a slogan. So if you use a slogan like defund the police, what does that mean? It means you don't have money for the police. Yeah. So the notion that by that you might mean something more subtle, like, well, we're going to take money from the police and we're going to put it to other places. Well, that could be fine, maybe depending on how it's done. Maybe not fine, depending on how it's done. But it might mean what you really need is you need to pay the police more, have more police so that they have better training, and also provide more services to other places so that maybe you don't always call in the police. Maybe you do need to be providing more money, not defunding the police, but funding other types of services like social workers, to allow them to do jobs that really they would be better suited for, where we don't have to worry about somebody having violent reactions to somebody else's behavior. So defunding the police is just, once again, just like a slogan. Somebody throws it out there. It riles people up on one side, makes people excited on the other. Ultimately, absolute ludicrousy. You're not fund the police. And all you end up doing then is you don't achieve the goal that you yourself want to do, which is to reform the police. Because if you make reforming the police defund the police, even if that's not what you really mean, but that's the words that you're using, you've made it less likely that you're going to reform. It becomes practically unattainable and irrational.
I agree, Jamie. All right, let's get less intense here.
Enough on those topics. That's right.
Why do you get into philosophy?
Oh, that's easy. Okay. A long time ago, 1990, I got out of the service and I started university. I wanted to be a high school history teacher. So I was a history major, and I have a bachelor's degree in history. So that's where I got my degree in. But my very first class by chance was a philosophy class. So it was Introduction to Philosophy, 9 o'clock in the morning with Bill Bondison. So the first class I take at university was this Introduction to Philosophy class, and I adored it. I just loved it, just absolutely ate it up. I'd never had a class like that before. I didn't know such a thing existed. And so because I liked it, I started taking more. So I took a logic class, I took an ethics class, these are kind of low-level stuff. And then I took this philosophy of mind class with a guy by the name of Andrew Melnick. And Andrew Melnick is an Oxford scholar, great British accent. I could listen to Andrew talk all day long. And I did great in that class. I really enjoyed it. It was a very difficult class, but I did really great at it. And I went up to Andrew, this is probably my junior year. He was Dr. Melnick, then I didn't call him Andrew then. And I said, I'd like to take this class. I showed him my registration book. And I said, there's this class called Philosophy of Science. I'd had a class on the history of science that I really enjoyed as a historian. But this class was on the philosophy of science. I thought that sounds really cool. I said, but it's this 400 level class, and none of my classes have been 400 level. And he said, that's because this is a graduate class for people in the PhD program here in philosophy. Okay. I said, oh, okay. But they said, you could do that. And I said, really? He said, yeah, I'll write you in. So he wrote me into this seminar class on the philosophy of science as a junior history major. And I still remember that first class I went to, and there's this big table. I'd never been to a room where you had a class that was just around a big table before. And there's like 10 guys in there. Might have been no girls. Philosophy, there's not a lot of gender diversity in a lot of philosophy programs. Right. And they all run around there. Like I got my master's degree at Wisconsin. I got my master's degree over here at University of Berkeley. And you got all these different things coming around, and they came to me and I said, I'm a history major here, and I'm a junior. And then so I took this class and I smoked. I kicked their ass. I was so much better than the rest of them. It was awesome. And so, I got an A in that class, and I'm like, okay, this is my thing, So I said I decided that basically when I was getting ready to start my senior year, I said I wanted to go philosophy. And I went to Dr. Melnick and I said, I'd like to be a philosopher, I didn't know anything about it because I was dumb. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and nobody, it almost didn't happen because I had no intention to go to college after high school. I didn't even know it was a possibility really. And I said, what should I do? He said, well, really, if you want to get a good job, you should go Ivy League. That's where you're going to, be most likely to get a job. And I was like, I don't want to go Ivy League, I don't want to go to one of these big schools, make me nervous. And he says, well, and this is, I think, spring, probably 1994. He says, well, we'll just put you into the program. And they did. He just wrote me into the philosophy program. I didn't apply for it. He just said, you're in. And I was in. And so I started in the fall of that year. And it was a rough year. That was a hard year because I had not had a lot of philosophy background. I'd only had enough classes maybe to constitute a minor, although I'd never declared it. And all these people, they're all not only they had master's degree in philosophy, they had BAs in philosophy from all these different universities. And so I was really overwhelmed that first year. But then my second semester, it clicked, and I was in an epistemology class, and it was advanced epistemology. I already had the epistemology class. And I remember standing up in that class after somebody gave some thought experiment, and I said, I understand. I said, for the first time in 6 months, I understand. And my brain at that point suddenly had an epiphany, and it just rewired itself finally. It'd been cooking like crazy. And so I was like, okay. And after that, it was smooth sailing. I just kicked ass all the way through. Ended up publishing before I was graduated, got multiple job hits as I went on to the market, ABD, graduated with honors in my dissertation, got hired by this university even before I finished my dissertation. And that was it. That was done. And so I knew, that I wanted to be a philosopher when Edgar Melnick told me I could be a philosopher. And that's why I dedicated my dissertation to him.
What would you say is the goal of a philosophy teacher? What is your goal?
I can tell you what the goal should be. I can't tell you what the goal is. So my goal is that my goal as a person is to understand the world before I die. As best I can, recognizing that I will fail, right? So I know that my understanding, and so I read vociferously, and I read everything, and I try to understand everything, whether it be science or history. I want to understand everything. So not philosophy is good too. I read a lot of philosophy, but I got a good feel for philosophy. So I read everything to try and understand. And because you can't, right? So that's an interesting thing about human beings. We have the ability to understand the universe that we live in. And that is not something that any other creature on this planet can say. Your dog or cat is happy, maybe hungry, maybe you should give it something, give it a treat. But it's not really understanding the universe around it. And in some ways that's more honest. It's living its life. It's a happy creature because it knows what it wants, knows what its desires are. Human beings are cursed a little bit that we can think about the universe. And that's how we can get anxious and worried, because we understand it, but we don't understand enough. So my goal has always been to try to understand to the bottom of absolutely everything I possibly can. And I've attempted to do so. And when I think about it from a teaching point of view, my goal is to help other people do that. To find their own philosophical worldview, right? To find things that they think are true, that they can set as cornerstones of their belief set, and their desire set, and live a better life as a result. Because when you're a philosopher, it's like you're kind of like in a race, and you're just a little bit ahead of everybody else, but you're like, it's rough territory. So you're like trying to find, like, shouting back to people, don't do this, before you, but unlike a person, everybody makes mistakes, and then they try to kill the kids. Don't do that. I did that when I was your age, and it was a big mistake. The philosopher is trying to anticipate these mistakes, trying to anticipate what the world is like so that people can live a better life. That's a goal that I have as a teacher. It's like, if I can come up with just a few things about what you're like as a person, what the world is like, that's going to allow you to navigate it more successfully, have a better life, have better relationships, be happier, be freer, be more self-determining, then I will have done my job. And then that's why I like teaching logic and critical thinking, because that's a way to sort of free people up, because a lot of the problems people have is that they are enslaved by their own beliefs and desires because somebody else gave them to them. They were raised on these beliefs and desires. They thought this was valuable. They thought that this was good. They thought this was true, only because somebody else told them to. I believe it. Somebody else told them to desire it. And so critical thinking is a way to kind of free up that all the constraints. One of the things that made me super happy in my life was learning to think for myself. Not learning to think myself and simply saying I'm going to believe whatever I want to believe, because that's a lie. That's not thinking for yourself. That's just delusion. But actually thinking for yourself in a way that you say, what is the world? What is it like? What is it actually like? What's really true? And then figuring out what it's like in a way that's going to allow you to live a better life in terms of that. And even if the world turns out to be a little bit uglier than you thought, at least you know what. I think that there's a value to the truth, not just in guiding our actions, but in simply seeing the world clearly. You can see something horrible, but if you see it clearly, there's a value to that. And that's my goal in life as a teacher, to try to make the lives of students better in terms of their understanding. And then in other ways too, just try to help them see themselves clearly. A lot of people don't see themselves very clearly. They devalue themselves. they don't recognize the possibilities that they have as a person. They don't recognize how close everybody actually is in terms of their capacities and their abilities. And, so I try to uplift people and get them to like be a mirror so that they can see themselves better. Andrew Melnick did that for me. He took a boy who did not think anything of himself academically. He didn't think anything that he could be a philosopher of all things. And he said, you can do that. Right. And he was right. So that's one thing I try to do is I try to take people and I try to show them you could do this, you could be this. And that's a good way to teach because it's honest too. You're trying to show that the people can achieve goals that they never realized. And then working at a university like Clarion, that's a perfect place to do it. Because
Perfect. Because
I've
for
done
me,
that before.
right, a lot of young men don't really want to be honest with themselves, right? That's why a lot of college boys are jerks because they don't
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
I can't relate to the women, right? Obviously, but for me, I was never honest with myself. But the moment recently, I've been honest with myself, and it's just changing my mental. That's why I started this podcast because now I want to listen to how other people think too.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're honest, and first off, it feels good, right? Anybody living in a sort of web of lies, they're hiding from themselves. They close off parts and chunks of their brain, to do that. Whenever somebody lies, they have to hide in some part of their brain from all the stuff that they're saying. They know it's not true. And then they can't live a happy life because there's not much of a life they live. They've blocked off chunks of the life that they've lied about in the past. They can't see themselves very clearly anymore because of that. And so it's sort of like, hiding underneath the bed, you created this person, you can only hide underneath the bed. So how can you be happy? Because you don't get a chance to live the normal life. And so it's better to be honest, and if that means that you know what your limitations are, I know what my limitations are. I know how well I can speak. I know how well I can sing, not well. I know how high I can jump, not high. Okay. I know lots of things about myself, but I also know the good things. I know what things I can be, what I'm good at. I know how I can accomplish things. That allows me to focus because then if I know what my strengths are, I can go with my strengths. I do recommend that people go with what they're strong at. Now, you don't need to worry about the things you're weak at. Everybody's weak at something. So if you're weak at it, don't do it. I'm not going to be a lifeguard because I'd not be very good at it. I can't swim, right? But what I am good at is I can explain things to other people. That's a gift I've always had. And I didn't realize when I was like a 12-year-old what that might mean for me, that it might mean that I'm going to be a teacher. And so that's a skill, and I'm good at it. And I've hopefully gotten better at it over the years and try to get better at continuing on. But it's like you need to see yourself clearly to do that and recognize your limitations and not suppose your limitations are somehow disparagements of you. They're just simple facts about you. Accept them, move on. That's how honesty works. And the same thing happens with a relationship. If you're in a relationship with somebody, it needs to be honest. You need to. Otherwise, you're living a fake life with that person, and that fakeness eventually is going to cause that relationship to destruct. Right? If it's honest, then when problems arise, you can fix them because you see them. Same thing like broader society. If you can't fix problems, clearly you lie about them. No progress is made. No progress in understanding, no moral progress in terms of improvement.
Yep, and that's exactly what I'm working on now, honesty. And I mean,
Good.
people like you are important for young men in college. I'm not in college anymore, but you could be important to that 18, 19-year-old. He might not listen to you at the moment, but he's gonna.
That's it. But that's exactly right. And that's another philosophy I have about teaching is that you don't worry about immediate results. And the nice thing about I've taught at Clarion for 22 years, and I've taught higher education for 27 now probably. I had 5 years of teaching in grad school, so I've taught a long time. And what happens is eventually people come back, right? And then you get people that said, "You really meant something to me. Because of you, I did this." And then you finally get this sort of feedback that allows you to, oh my gosh, all the stuff I've been doing actually might have had a little bit of help. And then that helps me because then that means that maybe I am making a difference in people's lives in a way that's positive as opposed to negative. I do want that to be the case. So that's important to me that whatever I do, I want to be truthful, but I also want to be kind, so I want to make somebody's life better, not worse. And when you're young, of course, you only listen to yourself to a certain degree, but some things I do believe they get planted deep, right? You plant a seed, you plant it deep, and then even if the person can't remember where that idea came from, it's like inception, you plant these seeds, you have no idea where it comes from. Yeah, maybe it was my voice. You're actually awesome. You could do that. Then maybe at some point you go, you know what? Maybe I'm going to go off and I'm going to try to be a medical doctor. And then they go off and be a medical doctor, and then they have a better life because of that. That's a fun thing.
Yeah, it's nice to have that impact. Like, I mean, if I was 18 in your class, right, and you told me not to go to that party that Friday night, I'm probably gonna go.
Yeah.
But I might make some sort of mistake at that party. I might do something stupid and then learn from it.
But what I would tell you about that is that there's a balance that you need to have, and just
Right.
the balance is that you can only. We often think, should I do something only short term, like go to the party, or should I always worry about the long term, always study, right? So you get this, but it's a false dichotomy because you should be doing both. You have to hit a balance. Your life is important right now. That person who wants to go to party, they're important. They may need to party, but you will continue on, and that person who needs to graduate is also important. So the trick is always to try to find the balance that's going to allow you to maximize the happiness you have now and the happiness in the future. And then critically realize that you will change. That talking about like running ahead and seeing what the world is like. Your values change when you change, and you change all the time. I'm still changing as a person. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I've changed in dramatic fashion, and because of that, what I want, what I desire has changed as well. So you can't predict too far ahead. You can't imagine that you can know at age 18 what you're really going to want when you're 23, or what you're going to want when you're 30. You can only kind of guess. So you're going to go, okay, I'm going to want food. Okay, I'm going to want a place to live. Maybe I might want a relationship, but I might not want a relationship just to have a relationship. I might want a very serious relationship. And all these things can change through time, and they will change through time. So it's best to plan. Don't plan too far ahead, because then you'll set yourself up for a life that you want. If somebody planned a life to the T, and then all of a sudden they hit 40 and they go, I did it. I accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish. And then they're like, now what? Right? Now they don't have a life because they don't know what to do. They've had this long-term goal. And now they realize that really what they want is maybe something entirely different. So you got to kind of body check yourself as you're going along, and making sure that the path you've set for yourself is one that you continue on to follow.
People like you are important, Jamie. Unbiased, just
exactly. Well, I try to be. That's exactly. I mean, that's important too, because when people can sniff bias, they can smell dishonesty, and so when you're trying to be a good teacher, it's important that you are unbiased. I always tell students, because it's true, I really don't care what I believe, so why would I care what you believe? I'm not interested in my own beliefs. I gave up on them. I want to know what's true. If it's true, it's true. I don't have to, then it's not me, it's just the world, I go with the evidence. So then I don't have to worry about me being biased. I just go with whatever happens to be true, If God exists, cool. Then God exists. If God doesn't exist, okay, then God doesn't exist. Then I go with the evidence I have available and not worry about it. And then you have to worry about your biases or think somehow your beliefs represent you. Your beliefs don't represent you.
Right.
Beliefs are about the world. They're not about you. They're either true or false. They're not about you at all. But what matters mostly is how you behave, how you live your life, how you treat other people. What matters really are the values that you hold. And there's a little more freedom with values. And so as long as you're satisfied with the values that you got and they integrate with other values that you have, you'll probably be a pretty happy person. But you don't have to be dishonest. That's why when people have these ridiculous beliefs, people know that because they're just being dishonest. Some people are dishonest because they're just intentionally dishonest. That's how they live their lives. Sometimes people are just dishonest in the sense that they're confused and they try to latch on to something as certain when it's not really certain, because they think that's what they need to be. They need to be certain about things, and that's really what's valuable. But certainty is overrated. There's nothing certain.
I agree. Jamie, people are going to learn a lot from this podcast. I hope.
Good. Well, I appreciate you having me. I'm going to, I think my wife's making tacos tonight, so I'm kind of pumped.
Nice.
We got blue taco shells. They look pretty cool. We hit Wegmans on the way back from a little trip that we did, and it was so nice. I love that grocery store. And so we picked up a few things, and one of them were these blue taco shells. I don't know what a blue taco shell tastes like, but it looked pretty damn good. So I'm looking forward to
that. I think all tacos taste great, so I'm sure.
I have not met one that I did not like. That is maybe something in high school.
Yeah, but thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad that you're out of college. How's your life going right now?
I work for Ford. I saw you.
you know, when I was coming to pick up the car the other day, you know, so I
Yep.
thought it was you. I,
Mhm.
I didn't see you quick enough, so I don't have my contacts in. I can't see somebody from a distance. So I'm
Right.
looking, and but by the time I got you, it'd been too late to like
No.
acknowledge you. So I apologize for that. Mostly, what happens when people wave for me across campus, I just wave because
Yeah.
waving, I know them. But I cannot see very far without my glasses on. So it's one of those.
No, it's fine. But yeah,
Been there
that's
then.
what I do that full time. I work there.
And then you do your videos, right?
Yeah, videos and photography. Yep.
And yeah, so that's a good gig, and eventually it's a way to be creative. You know, that's something um, I would also say is like, you know, go with some deep human values. One of the deep human values is, and this is the good Nietzschean insight, is that we are artists. You know, we create the world around us, and you have to be able to find some way to do that. That's a capacity that you have that nothing else has. You know, you have the capacity to look at a blank canvas and figure out what you want it to look like. And when you're doing your videography, it's the same thing. You know, you've got constraints that you work under. You know, in the same way that somebody who's working with paints has constraints. But other than the constraints, you've got an open field of possibilities that you can use to create the vision that you want to, and then get better, right? Practice your craft, and that's a way to make your art not only be something that's important to you, but important to other people. And I think you've done a great job with that. Your videos are fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it just makes me more open, makes me more creative, and
Yeah, exactly. And you have to do that. Otherwise, you're stultifying yourself. You're not going to be. And that's another thing with Facebook posts. I mean, my memes are just a way for me to be creative, you know. So I'll just be sitting there grading, and then I'll go, "Oh my god," you know. And then a joke will pop in my mind. And go, there you go.
right.
It helps me be more honest with myself because that's mostly what I am.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
All right.
Enjoy tacos.
I'm going to go eat my tacos, and you have a good night. Okay.
You too. Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.